Welcome, fellow lovers of the Bible, as we meet to consider the fourth great O antiphon of Advent, beginning with the words, O Key of David. O clavis David et sceptrum domus Israel. The phrase Key of David clearly comes from Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22, which contains the slightly longer phrase, Key of the House of David. House there could be taken as meaning the palace, or it could be taken as meaning the family. The House of Windsor is the royal family of England. The House of David was the royal family of Jerusalem. Key of the house, though, does make it seem like we are talking about the palace here, the key to the palace of David. The word for key, by the way, mafteach, means an opener. So the purpose of the key is to open up the royal palace for visitors, people who are providing services to the family that lives in the house. Qui aperis et nemo claudit, claudis et nemo aperit. And so what is the use of the object? What is the job description of the holder of the object? It is to open so no one else may close, and it is to close so no one else may open. The servant who was in charge of the palace was not a lord or master. The king was lord of the palace. No, the one in charge of the palace was a servant of the king, who could be dismissed at the king's word, as Shubna was, and created at the king's word, as Eliakim was. And so, they were in charge, but they were not the Lord and Master. They were the servant of the Lord and Master, the king. The duties involved carrying a key upon the shoulder, probably a shoulder harness that allowed the key to be kept securely and then removed and used to unlock the door of the palace and relock the door of the palace. This was a job of supreme importance for the security of the kingdom. You just couldn't have people wandering through the palace. There were archives in there. Only people authorized and using the archives responsibly were allowed in. There were royal children in there. You wouldn't want to see any of them abducted. There were more royal wives in there, and that was extremely important to keep the integrity and reputation of the wives secure, so that you couldn't have young gentlemen passing through at will. So the one in charge of the palace would let in only people who had some task to perform in the palace. A delivery truck would arrive with bath towels for the palace. The one in charge of the palace would inspect the towels, make sure there was no young man hiding in there, and then allow in the delivery with orders to come out as quickly as possible. This was not just for the integrity of the wives, but also so that there could be no doubt about the paternity of the children born in the palace. Only the king had the rights of husband in the palace, and any other young man in there might be accused of, and the royal wife accused of, and the royal children be accused of foul play. It was paramount for the descendant of the king to be the successor of the king, especially in Israel, where there was the promise that a descendant of David would always sit upon his throne. The master of the palace, I use that term figuratively because it wasn't the term they used, but the one responsible for the palace was responsible for guaranteeing the paternity of the royal children. So that key let in only people who were trustworthy, and that key did not let out any of the wives except under strict supervision. That was the way it was. They didn't have paternity tests back then. They had to take scrupulous caution about such matters. There was another official. Just as there was someone over the palace, there was also somebody over the prison. These were two completely separate jobs, but both of them involved a key. The one in charge of the palace had the only key to the palace. The one in charge of the prison had the only key to the prison. Again, this was a royal servant, not a lord. The one in charge of the prison was not the lord of the prison. The king was the lord and master of the prison. But there was a servant placed in charge of it, as with responsibility for only letting in people who had some business there. New prisoners, visiting guards, or delivery people. The original description of he shuts and no one can open, he opens and no one can shut, was used to refer to the one in charge of the palace, but the same term applied equally to the one in charge of the prison. Isaiah is talking about the first. The antiphon is morphing towards the second, not someone who is in charge of the royal house, but someone who is in charge of the royal prisoners, someone with the key to let prisoners out. Whether we're trying to get into a nice place or trying to get out of a bad place, we sing to the keeper of the keys this one simple little song. Veni ereduc vinctum de domo carceris. The antiphon draws on the vocabulary of Isaiah chapter 42 here, where it says, Lahotzi asir, to release a prisoner, mibeth kela, from the house of captivity. Sedentem in tenebris, et umbra mortis. Again, the antiphon draws on the vocabulary of Isaiah, the beginning of chapter 9. Walkers in darkness, holchim bachoshech, dwellers in the shadow of death, yoshevei tzalmaweth. Isaiah had walking in darkness and dwelling in the shadow of death. Psalm 107 compacts this phrase into dwelling in darkness and the shadow of death. And a second time in the same psalm, it says, lead us out of darkness and the shadow of death. Clearly, Psalm 107 verse 14 is a precise source used by the creators of the antiphon. We are all more or less dwelling in darkness now because we're just about at the shortest day of the year. And I have very little time to film videos because I use natural light of the sun. And I have to get the videos done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon or else. People who work outdoors, working with animals, working in the fields, they have shorter working hours. Maybe their hours of daylight are not long enough for them to do the business they have. So we are all dwelling under darkness now which is a good time of year for us to be reminded that the Lord comes to release us from darkness. We may have other bonds on our souls, bonds of sin, habits of sin, temptations that plague us, and bad habits that irritate our neighbors, and constraints on our freedom of thought and our freedom of speech and our freedom of worship. So let us now reverently ask the coming Lord to set us free from whatever bondage we may find ourselves in, to set free our faith, our piety, and our goodness into a world that so badly needs us. Pray for that as we hear the whole antiphon now. O clavis David et sceptrum domus Israel, qui aperis et nemo claudis et nemo aperit. Veni reduc vinctum de domo carceris, sedentem in tenebris, et umbra mortis.